If you're a fan of shoot-'em-ups and think you've already faced enough challenges, get ready to test your reflexes and patience like never before. Today we're going to explore 10 games that are true nightmares for any player. I'm Matthew, and we're starting the list with Metal Slug 3, a game that seems inviting with its cartoonish graphics and nonsense humor, but hides one of the most relentless difficulties in the run-and-gun genre. For hardcore players, the biggest enemy here isn't just the absurd number of enemies on screen, but the demand for constant precision. The game doesn't allow for mistakes. A single poorly avoided shot or a miscalculated jump and there goes a life. And believe me, you'll lose many, even when you already know what's coming. The learning curve is cruel. The stages are long and full of branches, requiring the player to memorize not only the order of enemies, but also the location of traps, vehicles, and sub-bosses. Unlike many games in the genre, memorization here isn't enough. You need fast reflexes and the ability to quickly read the situation, as enemies appear from all sides, often from off-screen. The bosses themselves are a test of patience and coordination. They have multiple phases, random attack patterns, and generally occupy a good portion of the screen, reducing the player's maneuverability. It's common to spend more time dodging than shooting, which requires discipline not to panic. A detail that makes Metal Slug 3 especially difficult is the variety of extreme situations. One moment you're in a submarine, the next you're fighting aliens in space, and each scenario brings a unique set of challenges. This constant change forces the player to adapt their playing style every few minutes, with no time to relax. Mushihimesama is one of the most iconic bullet hell games ever created, and also one of the most relentless. For hardcore players, it represents the pinnacle of hand-eye coordination and patience under pressure. The number of projectiles on screen reaches an almost hypnotic level, turning each match into a test of millimetric reflexes. It's a game that punishes any distraction, and the simple act of surviving is already a victory. The learning curve is brutal, because it's not enough to just dodge. You have to understand the flow of the shooting patterns, which frequently form true labyrinths of bullets. Each stage requires memorization of enemy weak points and boss rotations. But even with all the knowledge, the execution has to be flawless. Mushihimesama doesn't forgive a second of hesitation. The bosses are true works of art of chaos. They fire complex patterns that, at first, seem impossible to get through. And unlike other games, here the field of vision is constantly filled with slow projectiles, which gives the player the false impression of having time to think. When, in reality, every micro-movement needs to be precise and calculated. One of the biggest aggravating factors for the difficulty is the minuscule hitbox of the character. This means it's possible to escape through absurdly tight spaces, but also that any positioning error, no matter how small, is fatal. The game pushes you into a state of hyper-concentration, where any ill-timed blink can cost you a life.
Kimi ni aete yokatta.
Contra Hardcore is the type of game that turns even veterans into insecure beginners. Launched in the 16-bit era, it already showed a level of difficulty that would make many modern players give up before the halfway point. It's fast, relentless, and full of situations where death seems inevitable on the first try. And precisely for this reason, it is so respected in the world of difficult games. The learning curve is cruel. The game requires you to learn enemy patterns, abrupt changes in scenery, and boss mechanics without giving you time to breathe. A common mistake for novices and even experienced players is to think that memorizing the stage is enough, but Contra Hardcore loves to change the dynamics from one moment to the next, breaking any expectation. The bosses are a separate chapter. They appear with unpredictable attacks, huge damage areas, and multiple transformations. Sometimes the enemy completely changes the combat style in the middle of the battle, forcing the player to improvise. This keeps the tension at a maximum and prevents the player from feeling comfortable at any time. Another factor that increases the difficulty is the variety of alternate routes and endings. Each path has unique challenges, forcing anyone who wants to beat everything to face new situations that can be even more brutal than the base game. This keeps the replay factor high, but also ensures that frustration lasts for a long time. Ikaruga is one of those games that mix genius and cruelty in equal doses. It's not just a bullet hell, it's a puzzle shooter disguised as a frantic firefight, and this confuses even hardcore players. The difference is the polarity system, where you switch between black and white colors to absorb enemy shots of the same color and cause more damage to opponents of the opposite color. Sounds simple? In practice, it's a mental torment at high speed. The learning curve is almost vertical. In the first few minutes, you'll feel like you're learning something new, but you soon realize that the real difficulty is not just surviving, but surviving while scoring in the most efficient way possible. Ikaruga's combo system rewards surgical precision. Making a mistake in the sequence for a single enemy is a reason to restart the stage if you're playing seriously. The bosses here are not content to simply bombard you with bullets. They create patterns that force the constant use of polarity switching, often in the middle of a tiny space to maneuver. It's a dance of death, where a millimetric slip is enough to end the attempt, and with each defeat, you realize that you didn't lose just because of slow reflexes, but due to a lack of mental planning. The cruelest factor of Ikaruga is the constant psychological pressure. You can't just react. You need to predict, plan, and execute in fractions of a second. Hardcore players quickly discover that it's not just about mastering the mechanics, but about reprogramming the brain to think in two colors at the same time while facing the onslaught of enemies. Deathsmiles is a horizontal shoot-'em-up that looks cute at first glance, but hides a respectable difficulty. For hardcore players, it combines charming aesthetics with one of the most treacherous learning curves in the genre. Each stage is full of fast enemies and treacherous projectiles, and the screen never lets up. Even veterans need sharp reflexes to avoid being surprised. The great challenge of Deathsmiles is in controlling space and positioning. You need to know exactly where your character is at all times, as enemies and shots appear from multiple directions, often in patterns that deceive the player's perception. The margin of error is minimal, and the reward for successfully dodging complex sequences is enormous. But every slip means losing precious lives. The bosses are pure strategy in motion. Each one has multiple phases, large-scale attacks, and projectile combinations that force the player to switch between attack and defense quickly. The speed of the game and the need to manipulate intelligent attacks make each encounter a true test of patience and precision. Another factor that increases the difficulty is the scoring and collectibles system. To achieve high scores, you need to risk more, staying close to enemies and projectiles, an approach that exponentially increases the risk of death. Hardcore players know that the path to mastery requires accepting this constant tension between survival and scoring. Strania the Stella Machina is a vertical shoot-'em-up that stands out for its strategic difficulty. Unlike many classic bullet hells, it requires the player to understand enemy and boss patterns in an almost mathematical way. Hardcore players here face a challenge that combines speed, precise positioning, and constant screen reading. The learning curve is demanding. Each stage presents enemies with coordinated attacks that change their behavior depending on your position. This forces the player to think quickly and adjust strategies continuously. It's not just about reflexes. It's necessary to analyze and memorize complex patterns, making each attempt a lesson in patience. The bosses are true design monsters. With attacks in multiple directions and sudden pattern changes, they require the player to master both character movement and attack timing. Any calculation error means restarting, and even small slips can cost precious lives. Another element that increases the difficulty is the need to manage resources and power-ups. Knowing when to attack or protect yourself, as well as choosing the right weapon for each situation, is essential to survive the most advanced stages. The combination of speed, precision, and strategy makes the game a true test for veteran players. Triggerheart Exelica is a shoot-'em-up that challenges even the most experienced players with its unique grappling hook and tactical movement mechanics. Unlike other games in the genre, here you need to control not only the attack, but also how you position yourself using hooks that grab enemies and objects, turning each stage into a puzzle of shots and dodges. For hardcore players, it's a constant test of precision and timing. The learning curve is intense. Players need to master the hook movement while dodging projectiles in unpredictable patterns. Minimal errors can cost not only a life, but also lose strategic attack opportunities, making progress slow and demanding. Your attention needs to be on every detail of the screen, always calculating risks and anticipating enemy movements. The bosses are especially challenging, with large-scale attacks and complex combinations that force the player to constantly switch between offense and defense. The correct use of the hook becomes essential, as ignoring its mechanics at critical moments is practically suicide. Each battle requires partial memorization of patterns and almost perfect reflexes. Radiant Silvergun is a classic bullet hell that has become a reference for strategic difficulty and surgical precision. Each stage requires the player to master multiple weapons with distinct functions, switching quickly to deal with hordes of enemies and powerful attacks. For hardcore players, the biggest challenge is thinking fast and acting efficiently under constant pressure. The learning curve is steep, as the game combines unpredictable enemy patterns with the need to use the arsenal strategically. It's not just dodging. You have to choose which weapon to use in each situation to maximize damage and, at the same time, survive. Novice players quickly realize that the game punishes mistakes, but veterans also feel the pressure. The bosses are particularly feared. With multiple phases and devastating attacks, they force the player to know their patterns almost by heart. Small mistakes can be fatal, and even if you have time to react, the execution needs to be perfect. The level of challenge makes each victory extremely gratifying. Another element that increases the difficulty is the combo and scoring system. To reach the highest ranking, you need to execute complex strategies while avoiding getting hit. This turns the game into a mental and physical race, keeping the player constantly on the edge. Sine Mora X combines shoot-'em-up elements with a dense narrative and time mechanics that raise the challenge to another level. For hardcore players, the big difference is the time system. Each action consumes seconds from the clock, and dying or taking too long to defeat enemies reduces your time even more, turning each stage into a race against time. The mental pressure is constant, making the experience more intense than most traditional shooters. The bosses are true strategic challenges. Each one presents multiple phases with synchronized attacks that require memorization and quick reflexes. In addition, many bosses have specific weak points that can only be exploited using perfect timing, which forces the player to repeat battles several times until they internalize the correct strategy. Another difficulty factor is the combination of detailed scenarios and multiple simultaneous enemies. The field of view is frequently filled with projectiles and obstacles, requiring total attention and millimetrically calculated movements. Hardcore players realize that every second wasted can mean the difference between victory and defeat. In the end, Sine Mora X is not just a test of skill, but also of planning and time management. Each successfully completed stage is a feeling of accomplishment that mixes adrenaline and satisfaction, consolidating the game as one of the most challenging shooters of the modern era.
Piri, where are you, Piri? Ah, I see your watchdogs awake.
Jamestown is a shoot-'em-up that takes players back to the colonial era with a unique theme, but which doesn't diminish its difficulty at all. For hardcore players, the biggest challenge is the speed and quantity of projectiles that appear simultaneously. The charming aesthetic is deceiving, but the pressure of the bullet-filled screen requires quick reflexes and instant decision-making. The learning curve is intense. Each stage has specific attack patterns, multiple enemy types, and bosses that require memorization and perfect timing. In addition, the game encourages the use of multiple power-ups and strategic navigation to maximize the score, which adds an extra layer of complexity for those who seek to master all the stages. Jamestown's bosses are tests of patience and precision. Their elaborate pattern attacks cover almost the entire screen, forcing the player to plan each move in advance. Small mistakes can be fatal, and even veterans can find themselves repeating stages several times to learn every nuance of the attacks. Another factor that increases the difficulty is the need to maintain a high score while surviving. This means that, instead of just focusing on dodging, the player needs to risk more, getting closer to enemies and bullets to maximize combos. This constant tension turns each stage into a continuous mental and physical test. Well, that was the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and see you in the next video.